Most AI projects in education are failing. I'm not talking about a few bumps in the road. I'm not talking about growing pains. I'm talking about full-scale, expensive, demoralizing failures. School districts spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on AI initiatives that teachers never use. Universities rolling out tools that students ignore. Vendors making promises that evaporate the second real classrooms get involved. And almost nobody is talking about why. Hey, I'm Dr. Brian, and welcome to the AI Educator. This is the very first episode of this channel, and I wanted to start with something that might sound a little controversial. But I promise you, by the end of this episode, you're going to see exactly what I mean. And more importantly, you're going to understand what we can actually do about it. Now, if you're a teacher, an administrator, a faculty member, an instructional designer, if you care about education and you've been watching this AI wave roll in, you've probably felt it. That gap between the promise and the reality. You've been told AI is going to transform everything. But when you sit down and actually try to use it in your work, it doesn't quite fit. It's close, but it's not there. And that gap, that's not your fault. That's a design problem. And today, I'm going to break down exactly where that design problem comes from. Let me start with a number that should alarm everyone in education. Research consistently shows that somewhere between 70 and 85% of AI implementations fail. Not just in education, across all industries. But in education, I'd argue the number is even higher because we have a unique combination of challenges: tight budgets, overworked professionals, and workflows that are genuinely different from the corporate world. So why do these implementations fail? Here's the simple version. Nobody builds for the market. What do I mean by that? Think about what happens when a school district or a university decides to adopt AI. What's the first thing they do? They buy licenses for a general purpose tool. They hand everyone access to a chatbot. And then they say, go innovate. That's like handing someone a block of marble and a chisel and saying, go sculpt a masterpiece. Technically, you gave them the tools, but you didn't give them anything that actually fits their workflow. And here's the thing. I've watched this play out over and over again. The teacher sits down with a general purpose AI tool. They type in a prompt. They get back something that's okay. Maybe it's a lesson plan that's too generic. Maybe it's a quiz that doesn't align with their standards. Maybe it's feedback on student work that sounds robotic and impersonal. So they tweak, they re-prompt. They spend 30 minutes trying to get something they could have written in 15. And after a few rounds of that, they stop using the tool. Not because AI doesn't work, but because that tool doesn't work for them. Let me give you an analogy from another industry to make this crystal clear. Think about video creation. Right now, you've got tools like DID and Sora that can generate video from text. Amazing technology. But here's what's interesting. These tools didn't just release a raw AI model and say, figure it out. They built interfaces. They built workflows. DID lets you upload an avatar, type your script, choose a voice, and generate a video. It's built for a specific use case, talking head videos. Sora lets you describe a scene and generate cinematic footage. Built for a specific use case, visual storytelling. They took powerful underlying AI and wrapped it in a purpose-built experience. Now think about education. We have incredibly powerful AI models, but what are we doing with them? We're giving educators a blank text box and saying, write a prompt. That's like giving someone the raw video generation model and saying, write the API call yourself. It doesn't work, not because the people aren't smart enough. Educators are some of the smartest, most adaptable professionals I've ever worked with. It doesn't work because the tool isn't built for the job. Let me get specific. Think about the workflow of grading a stack of discussion posts. You've got 30 students. Each one has written a response. You need to read each one, evaluate it against your rubric, write personalized feedback, and do it all before Thursday. Now, a general purpose AI can help with some of that, in theory, But when you actually sit down to do it, you hit friction everywhere. You've got to copy and paste each response. You've got to re-explain your rubric every time. You've got to check the output for accuracy. You've got to make sure the feedback sounds like you and not like a robot. That friction adds up. And for a lot of teachers, the friction makes it not worth it. But what if you had a tool that was built specifically for that workflow? What if it already knew your rubric? What if it already had the student's name and submission loaded? What if it generated a draft of feedback that matched your voice because it had learned from examples you provided? What if all you had to do was review and approve? That's the difference between a general purpose tool and a workflow specific tool. And that difference is why most AI in education is failing. So if the problem is this obvious, and I think it is, why does it keep happening? A few reasons. First, the people building AI tools are usually not educators. They're engineers. They're incredibly talented, but they're solving a technical problem, not a pedagogical one. They see education as a single market, but education isn't one market. K through 12 is different from higher ed. Higher ed is different from corporate training. Within K through 12, elementary is different from high school. Within higher ed, a physics professor has different needs than an English professor. Second, there's a gold rush mentality right now. Everyone wants to be the AI education company. So you get a flood of products that are really just a wrapper around the same AI model with an education-themed interface slapped on top. They look like education tools. They market like education tools. But they don't work like education tools because they weren't built from the ground up around actual educational workflows. Third, and this is the one that frustrates me the most, there's a lack of implementation expertise. Even when a school gets a decent tool, they don't have the support to actually implement it well. They don't have someone who understands both the technology and the pedagogy. So the tool sits on a shelf, or it gets used badly, or it gets used by 3 enthusiastic early adopters and ignored by everyone else. Okay, so I've laid out the problem. Now let me talk about what actually works, because I don't want to just complain. I want to point toward a solution. What works is starting with the workflow, not starting with the technology, not starting with what can AI do, but starting with what does this educator actually need to accomplish today. When you start with the workflow, everything changes. You stop trying to make a general tool do a specific job. You start building, or at least looking for, tools that are designed for that specific job from the ground up. And here's the key insight. The best AI tools for education don't feel like AI tools. They feel like superpowered versions of what you already do. The workflow is familiar. The output is useful. The friction is minimal. That's the standard we should be holding every AI tool in education to. Does it fit the workflow? Is the output actually useful without heavy editing? Does it reduce friction or add friction? If it adds friction, it doesn't matter how impressive the underlying AI is, it's going to fail. And there's one more thing I want to address here, because it's directly connected. Professional development around AI in education is almost universally terrible. I don't say that to be mean. I say it because I've sat through dozens of these sessions, and the pattern is always the same. Someone stands at the front of the room, shows a few cool demos, says the possibilities are endless, and then sends everyone home. No hands-on practice, no workflow integration, no follow-up support. That's not professional development. That's a pep rally. Effective AI professional development looks completely different. It starts with a specific workflow, say, writing feedback on student essays. It shows the educator exactly how AI fits into that workflow. It gives them hands-on time with the tool, using their own content in a supported environment. And then it follows up a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later to troubleshoot, answer questions, and reinforce habits. That kind of PD takes more time and more resources, but it actually works. The drive-by demo, it produces a week of excitement and a month of nothing. If you're an administrator, listen to that carefully. Your AI professional development strategy matters just as much as the tools you buy, maybe more, because the best tool in the world is useless if nobody knows how to use it well. Now, here's where I get excited, because despite all these failures, and there are a lot of them, the opportunity is enormous. Education is one of the most workflow intensive professions on the planet. Think about everything a teacher does in a day: lesson planning, material creation, grading, feedback, communication with parents, reporting, professional development, committee work, and oh, yeah, actually teaching. Every single one of those workflows can be enhanced with AI, not replaced, enhanced, but only if we build the right tools for each one. Only if we stop pretending that one chatbot is going to solve everything. The institutions and the educators who figure this out first are going to have a massive advantage. Not because they're using fancier technology, but because they're using the right technology in the right way. And that's what this channel is about. Every episode, we're going to dig into specific workflows, specific frameworks, specific strategies for making AI actually work in education. Not the hype, not the theory, the reality. So let me leave you with this. If you've tried AI in your teaching and it felt clunky or slow or not quite worth the effort, that's not a you problem. That's a tool problem. And the good news is it's solvable. The question isn't whether AI will transform education. It will. The question is whether we're going to do it well or badly. Whether we're going to keep throwing general purpose tools at specific problems and wondering why they don't stick. Or whether we're going to demand better, purpose-built tools for the actual work educators do every day. I believe we can do it well. I've seen it done well, and I want to show you how. If this resonated with you, make sure you subscribe. Hit that notification bell, because we are just getting started. Next episode, I'm going to lay out a framework that changes how you think about AI in education entirely. The 3 types of AI in education. Most people only know about one of them. You're going to learn all 3. I'm Dr. Brian. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.